Hey y'all, how's it going? Welcome back. It's Mia, and today I wanted to do a little rewind and take a look back at Star Wars as it was in the year 2022. And this was a pretty big year for Star Wars because we had zero movie content, but we had a plethora of shows going on that weren't The Mandalorian. You know, for the first 2 years, it was just The Mandalorian, then it was The Mandalorian Season 2, but now we've had 3 separate shows, one of those being from the Mandoverse and 2 of them not. And so I wanted to kind of go over those as a whole, talk about how Star Wars did. So the first thing I'm going to kick it off with, and probably spend a little more time here than the other stuff because I didn't get to review, is the Book of Boba Fett. And technically, the first episode, the first chapter aired December 29th, 2021, but the rest of it obviously aired throughout January and February, so I think it's fair game to say, you know, for the most part, this was a 2022 show. And the Book of Boba Fett, where do I begin? It was kind of weird to see a Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau project in the Mandoverse where after 2 strong seasons of The Mandalorian, it felt like they were starting to drop the ball. And even though this was just a 7-episode series, it was just kind of like it. I think what the problem here is that Boba Fett was originally supposed to be a movie. You know, they kind of got pretty far with it. Then whatever happened, everything was detached from that project, and they ended up making it a series instead. So this is one of those first moments where we're like, okay, what will something look like when it goes from being a movie to a series? And I think despite Kathleen Kennedy putting Dave Filoni on the case to try to rehab it, I think maybe it was just the fact that the foundation overall was just shaky. Number one, trying to resurrect Boba Fett, who we always thought was dead, a huge task. And so now you've got this huge legendary monumental character and you're trying to make something new out of him, make him fresh, make him entertaining. And yeah, we teased him technically back in The Mandalorian, and so now it's like, okay, we have to find a way to justify Boba Fett coming back. We can't just bring him back just because fans think he's cool. If you think he's cool, you should go watch
Return of the Jedi
or Empire Strikes Back. So I think the Book of Boba Fett fell through for like 3 big reasons. And number one, as I was just kind of mentioning, was the fact that they took an awesome, cool as a cucumber character who barely said anything, and they made him, I hate to say soft because I know that can have some horrible discussion about that, but they just took his character and they didn't make him as interesting as he used to be, right? Kind of like the way that they, with Warner Brothers, took Black Adam and instead of making him an anti-villain, they made him more of like an anti-hero, which was really just a hero to begin with. There was no way about it. So you took out the interesting part about this character by making him too nice. I think we really wanted to see like if Boba Fett was going to be leading this new gang, right? He's taking over for Jabba the freaking Hutt. Like that is some serious stuff. You really got to step up. And so what I think they really could have had was honestly like a great kind of Star Wars crime show. Now Boba Fett didn't have to necessarily be the baddest guy, but I think the fact that he had to resolve everything with a peace treaty and kindness it just wasn't interesting. You know, it's like we could go to battle or we could have a whole lot of drama about this, but I'm just gonna shake your hand and you know, kiss it and make it better. And it's like, so that wasn't very interesting. So that was the way that they changed his character. Or at least he could have had a progression in this series where he learned that, hey, maybe doing things the hard way isn't the right thing to do. It's kind of just going from one extreme to the other was just kind of weird and disorienting. But number 2 was just the overall plot and the structure of this series, because the majority of it he's in the Bacta tank and he's having these flashbacks with being with the the Tusken Raiders, right? He gets adopted into their society and they kind of teach him everything that he needs to know, even though he was already a great bounty hunter to begin with. You know, it doesn't hurt to do a little hand-to-hand combat. Unless, God bless him, you're Tamura Morrison's age, and then it's kind of like, well, I'm not going to do a ton of combat, but when I do, it's gonna, I'm just gonna move on. Anyway, the flashback scenes just didn't progress the story forward, and so when we finally stopped spending time on those flashback scenes and we were going back into present day, the whole story anyway, and set in the present day, just wasn't exciting. And the finale just didn't feel like an earned finale because it was like, oh, now all of a sudden you want us to care about Boba Fett and defending his turf, and they just kind of had this kind of like cartoonish Fortnite brawl at the end. And so there were some interesting moments going on, but overall it didn't add up to anything in the end. And so then number 3, the thing that really, you could say, tanked this series or also made it better was the fact that halfway through it switched to being about the Mandalorian. It just kind of felt like it was like a visual representation of them being like, this show sucks. You want to talk about the Mandalorian? Oh yeah, let's talk about the Mandalorian. So those episodes with Mando, with Grogu, Ahsoka, with Luke, those were really enjoyable. The sad thing is, this is the Book of Boba Fett, so I'm sure it's been said many times over. It just didn't make any sense. I get having the Mandalorian be kind of like a cameo guy who shows up for an episode, but to have like a whole episode just specifically dedicated to him, it's like, come on. So that being said, the Book of Boba Fett, I don't think deserves a season 2 unless they really know how to pull it together. I think if Filoni and Favreau want to write The Mandalorian, that's fine, and they can throw in Boba Fett and Fennec Shand in those episodes, but yeah, Book of Boba Fett just didn't nail it for me, even though the Mando stuff was great. I think the overall execution was pretty poor. So let's move on to the other Star Wars series that aired then in the spring, which I did cover completely, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it was the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, and that show was weird because I was very excited coming into it, and I think everyone loves prequel Ian McGregor, prequel Obi-Wan Kenobi, as well having Hayden Christensen return, who, you know, both of these guys haven't returned to Star Wars in forever, so it was nice as an idea, right, of having them come back. And to me, this is another series where the execution just fell through. Now, if you recall from my series review, I was really on board with the series for episode 1. I loved the fact that we went to Alderaan, we had little Leia, we saw Bail Organa, we saw her mother as well. I was happy to see Alderaan because you don't get to see Alderaan in the rest of Star Wars, so I thought that was nice creatively. But then for me, the whole series kind of went downhill when it was kind of like they didn't know what to do with the series, in the sense that maybe they did know what to do, but the format was just a little lanky, having to repeatedly, like I said, like a Tom and Jerry game of cat and mouse, where Reva's chasing after them, the third sister. She gets close, and then they run away. And then she gets on the tail again, and then they run away. And so the constant game of cat and mouse felt like nothing was happening. I felt like I was losing my mind watching that series. And to me, at the end of the day, I don't think it really added much to the narrative of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I don't know, I really wanted to champion for this series. We had little Luke as well, so there were small moments in there that made you, or at least made me, excited to see these characters return. But again, it just felt like an empty tale. It didn't, I feel like with some of the Legends materials or the comics and stuff, they have good stories to tell, where it was like, hey, do you remember the time Obi-Wan Kenobi did this? Or do you remember the time Darth Vader did this? And you're like, yeah, I know these characters are gonna die, but I did enjoy seeing this little snippet of their life. And so maybe, I think if the Obi-Wan Kenobi series was a movie, I think it would have been better, just a kind of 2 hours in and out and saying, hey, this is a side adventure that Obi-Wan Kenobi went on. We don't have to go too deep into it. We don't have to make it this huge spectacle, but at least you get to see this nice little tale and we wrap it up. I don't think it had to go on for as long as it did. And then as well, for them to introduce the whole Anakin and Obi-Wan, I don't quite know how I feel about that, them coming back and saying, hey, but actually they did meet again. And so it kind of lessens the stuff that we saw in A New Hope. I think that some of those scenes they did nail quite well, especially by the finale when they had that talk and Obi-Wan really had to come to this understanding that Anakin was gone and now it's just Vader. So I did like that in a sense, but again, it just overall kind of fell through. And then finally, the last live action show that came out, just wrapped up recently, was Andor. And for once, yeah, I do have something good to say, which is I actually did end up enjoying Andor. I was one of those people where the first 3-4 episodes were incredibly slow. You can throw tomatoes at me all you want, but I stand by that, just because it seemed like they meandered a lot. So when we finally picked things up in episode 5, and they had direction, they had a goal, they had things to say, they had things to do, I actually enjoyed it. And in my review, I was like, I like that they have this grounded Star Wars universe. I like that we're getting a lot more emotional. We're doing a lot more character study. We're getting a new perspective that we have not seen in the Star Wars universe about this budding rebellion, about the people who are on the ground who are fighting. It is not just the organized rebellion. It is these little factions like the people on Ferrix who are saying enough is enough, or these people like Kino Loy and everyone on Narcana 5 or wherever they were at in the prison, right? And they were like, enough is enough, we're gonna rebel. So I like seeing those little moments. And like I said, man, the prison scene, to me, one of the greatest stories ever told on screen in Star Wars. Kino Loy, officially my favorite Star Wars character. And yeah, just the overall tone of it. I enjoyed the tone. I like that they got to be a little more grown up. I like that they got to say a couple of curse words here and there. So that's how you knew this was some big boy Star Wars stuff. But I have to give my props to Andor. They really picked it up in the end. I'm really excited to see where they take it with season 2. And I would say this was the best contribution to Star Wars in 2022. So Andor, you get my Medal of Honor. And finally, really quickly, Tales of the Jedi also released, it was this little mini series spin-off of the Clone Wars, basically, that it's hard to describe, but I did review this, so if you want to go back and see that in depth, you'll hear all my thoughts about that there. But, just kind of comparing and contrasting the life of Ahsoka with the life of Count Dooku, how they are both Jedi, how they both left the Order, and just kind of doing a little zoom in on their lives. Now, the Dooku stuff was awesome. The Ahsoka stuff to me was not necessary, but overall, I would say it was an interesting little snippet of story to tell. I'm thinking maybe honestly it could have just been a Count Dooku season, and then maybe next season they could have had Ahsoka if they want to continue to do this, and then another season they could maybe do a whole thing on Yaddle, who knows. But I like the idea of it. I like that we can take about 15 minutes in a couple of episodes to look at these different vignettes of these Jedi's lives, and yeah, don't have much more to say, but I think it was really well executed, and I think they deserve a season 2. So overall, Star Wars in 2022, just looking at media on screen, I think they did a decent job. I recently appeared on a stream with YouTuber Chillmonger called 33 Burning Star Wars Questions, where we kind of talked about how do we think the Star Wars universe is going, and I'll leave a link to that discussion in the description box. But I like to think that the Star Wars universe is on the mend if we're just looking at how everything was in the sequel trilogy. I do think that the series are a lot more healthy. They're finding their footing, and I mean, yeah, compared to the sequel series, to me it's a lot less divisive, and I think it's also showing that more weight, or at least to me, television and movies are now basically equals. I don't think that the Star Wars universe needs to be great, or they're not going to do well until they have another tentpole movie or something like that. I think the fact that they can put out these stories at movie quality, maybe aside from a couple of episodes of Obi-Wan Kenobi, but they're putting these out at movie quality. To me, we could go another 3 years, honestly, without seeing a Star Wars movie, because I think that these series are, in principle, being very well done. They know what they need to do. It's just, depending on some of these stories, I think they need to tighten up a bit. But I don't think they're necessarily train wrecks in the way that someone might look at the sequel trilogy and think. So to me, Star Wars is doing quite well. I think they had a pretty decent 2022. I enjoyed the ride for what it's worth. I think there's a lot of things that they can improve on. That's always going to happen. And I think next year should be interesting as well. We've got The Mandalorian Season 3 coming up in March. We've got Ahsoka series coming up later on. And then we've got The Bad Batch Season 2, which is actually coming out next month. So I'll be keeping a close eye out on all of those. I think it's going to pan out to be another good, decent year for Star Wars. I don't think it's going to be too explosive. I don't think these are going to disappoint supremely, and if they do, I am knocking on wood, because I really want the Mando Season 3 to be another home run, and the same for Ahsoka. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. Let me know what you thought about Star Wars in the year 2022. Did they do really well? What was your favorite project out of all of these? Had a lot of good contenders, I'll say for sure. And also be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this discussion. Subscribe for more. We'll be talking more Star Wars always. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.